Hi. Oh, we've got someone else joining. So I'll let them join first. But we're going to be talking today about cash flow. And as I was saying a little bit before I hit record, I'd set up the topics of these webinars a few months back. But yes, cash flow is always relevant, especially around financial year ends. But we're going to delve into that a bit more. Oh, we have Caroline as well. Okay. So I'm just going to move Carolyn's joining. Okay. I'm just going to put a little bit, for those of you who haven't met me, I think there's a couple of you on here who I know, and some who I'm not sure if you know me or not, because I can only see first names. So my name is Alpha. That is actually my real name, because I do get asked that. Hey, Caroline. And so a bit of my background. I started out professionally, I started out in corporate tax. Now, as a little girl, I didn't dream of being a tax accountant. That was quite far from my realm of ideas and things of what I wanted to do. But I actually originally studied marketing because I love the idea of creating, and I did international business because I love traveling. And then the sort of like the reality kicked in of, well, I actually need to find a job that pays a decent wage. So I actually went back to uni. And I've always been good with numbers. So I studied accounting. And then I started as a graduate for one of the big firms, and they just kind of like put you in an area, and I ended up in tax. Now, I really didn't like it, but what I did love was having clients who had problems and trying to help them resolve those problems, and doing tax returns at the same time became part of the compliance aspect. But beyond that, I really, really liked that problem solving aspect of it. So I actually moved into management consulting after that. I worked at Virgin, it was Virgin Blue back then, for about 4 years in their tax team. And what I liked there was I actually got to build it because it was pretty much non-existent. So I built a lot of the systems and processes and all of that. And so when I came to actually earn some decent money after a few years of being in the workforce, I thought, well, I'm good with numbers, so I should be good with money. But I was okay, but I still had no idea what I was doing. And so what I realized was that we don't actually get taught about money. So when people say to me, oh, I'm bad with numbers or I'm bad with math, I was like, that has absolutely nothing to do with it, because I was good with numbers, but I still didn't know what to do with money. It is a different language, and it is a different skill set in a way, but it's something that can be definitely learned. We do have our own biases and beliefs and everything that kind of come into that. But I started on that journey. And so I was on a self-development journey, and I was also on a knowledge journey. So I then went and studied financial planning because I was like, I don't know what this thing is. Like I hired a financial planner. He turned out to basically just be a salesperson, and I was paying a lot in fees, and I wasn't actually getting any information. I still remember our last meeting, I had a list of 20 questions. I was like, these are all the things that I actually really want to know. Can you actually do anything on this list for me? And he just like looked at me like I deer in headlights, and was like, I thought, okay, I'm going to take that as no. So thank you. We'll part ways. I'll just do this myself now. So I spent a long time learning and learning about it. So then on my journey, I also then decided to start a business helping people about money, with money. And it started in the personal space. But as I got clients, all of them, pretty much all, were business owners. And I thought, well, then there's the business finances stuff. And I was like, this I have a little bit of knowledge in because I used to help our high net worth individuals when I was a tax accountant. And then I realized there's a huge gap between what accountants do and what a business owner actually needs to know and do them and manage themselves. So that's how a lot of this was born. And a lot of the problem that I see is around how to manage cash flow. So I'll get into that in a little bit more detail, but a little bit more about, so this was my journey. So this was me as a very young, inexperienced tax, going, oh yay, this is, life's exciting, everything's rosy, and I'm learning and developing. And then that came the reality that I really knew very little about a lot of things. As we kind of, the more knowledge that we gain, the more we realize that we need to know and we need to learn. And I really was focused on wanting to be able to have a bit more financial independence and financial freedom. Now, those words and terms can mean different things for different people, but for me, it really meant being able to enjoy life. I wanted to travel. That's me with my little girl when she was 6 out Uluru, and we had the most spectacular time. We did all the things. We did a helicopter ride. I love being able to have the choice to do things like that, because that for me is what I want. Everybody's vision and what they want for their life is different. I'm also not a fan of debt. So that's why cash flow to me is really, really important, is how to manage your cash so that you can choose what you want from life. So these are the things we're going to cover today. Obviously, this is quite a big issue, a big topic, I should say, and we've got a sort of limited amount of time. I'm going to try and keep it to about 40, 45 minutes to have time still for question and answers at the end. But I wanted to talk about what cash flow actually is, because I think there's terminology that does get a little bit confused. And then I want to talk about what it actually means, being aware of cash flow, and how that changes your life, what that then allows you to actually do. And then what other things do you need to know to help support your cash flow? So there are still some terms that you will hear your accountant use, but understanding what they mean and how they relate to cash flow becomes really important. And I'm going to keep this as simple, hopefully, as possible. If anything doesn't make sense, please ask, because there are literally no stupid questions, because there's so many different ways that this is communicated, so it can get confusing. So firstly, what is cash flow? It's money coming in and money going out. And it sounds really simple, but being able to manage the money coming in and manage the money going out is where the complexity starts to come in. And as a business owner, the money coming in fluctuates and the money going out generally stays quite steady. It can fluctuate a little bit as well, but if lots of things these days are on like a subscription basis. So we tend to have a relatively clear understanding, especially if we've mapped it out. But the coming in part is a little difficult, or a bit more difficult to manage. Then these things are collectively put into what is called a cash flow statement, which is, when I look at cash flow statements, I have to admit, I look at it and go, this isn't really very helpful for most people who don't really know what it's saying, because there's a lot of terminology and jargon in there. So technically, really, it comes down to budgeting and forecasting. So your money, you see what's coming in, and then you see what's going out. And from my perspective, having a certain level of detail is important, because in the detail, there is knowledge that allows you to then make better decisions. So rather than just, connecting your accounting system to your bank accounts and then just allowing your bookkeeper and your accountant to do their thing, it's really, really good still for yourself to have a view of what's actually going specifically in and out, like what you're actually spending your money on. I've even had conversations with bookkeepers and accountants, and they just look at me blankly when I ask for what the actual cash flow in and out is. They just give me the statement. I was like, I want more than the statement, because it doesn't really give you the level of detail that you need to know. For example, I do every 6 months, I do a bit of a review of my expenses, personal and business. And I was paying for 3 different subscriptions for software that essentially did the same thing. I wanted a way to edit videos, and I wanted a way to put captions in. And I had one software that did one of those things really well, and another one of those things sort of okay, but it was okay enough. And I thought, I don't know why I'm paying 3 different things when I could just keep one. So it's decisions like that, and that ended up saving me $100 a month, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but when you do that on other things, like you look at your insurances, and bit by bit, you can end up saving thousands of dollars a year just by being aware of your cash flow. And that is something that no one's really going to help you with unless you actually specifically ask them to do it, or you sit down and do it yourself. So knowing how much actual cash you have, and not just the accounting system numbers, is really, really important. So that is cash flow. No other way to kind of to sugarcoat that. And then why do you need to know it? Because sometimes I'll be like, oh, well, my account just handles it and I don't need to know it. Well, you actually really do, because you're missing out on so much that you can choose in your life. So from a business perspective, ask yourself, what kind of business do you want? And this can apply to life as well. So if you don't have a business, just look at the personal side. But if you have a business as well, one feeds into the other, because ultimately, what is it that you want? Do you want more time with your family? Do you want more time to travel? Do you want more money to travel? Do you want to go to the theater more? Think of life in those terms. And this is where your cash flow and everything can actually help you. But the kind of business that you want, for the last few years, a lot of businesses have had to go more online, because in person was quite restrictive. We couldn't travel, we couldn't actually go to things as well. So beyond that, based on what was actually imposed. What do you really want as a business? And maybe it's made you realize that you actually do want to be more online. And that way it might actually have been a good realization. And then why do you want that kind of business? And we're not just saying because it's easier. That's a get out of free jail free card kind of answer, which is not, that's not enough. So why do you actually want that? What kind of lifestyle do you really want? Because ultimately, if we're not doing this in a way that we really want to, we're going to resent it. And when we resent it, we don't attract as much abundance, and it just becomes this energy cycle, which becomes heavy. And then how much money do you actually need your business to make? I see this a lot too. Businesses will look retrospectively at the numbers that they have coming in and the expenses going out. But what do you actually need to sell in order to make a number? So this is beyond just a financial goal, because anybody can say, I want to make 250,000 in my business this year. Okay, cool. A, where did that number come from? And secondly, what do you need to do to actually achieve it? And this is also where you can start to look at the trends in your cash flow. I have a client who works in the education space. So her income fluctuates based on school terms. And so obviously at Christmas time, when there's the larger break over the summer period, her income was starting to drop off a bit. And so she had some online work that she was doing and some products that she was selling, because it was literacy based products. And so she'd start to sell those in December, help get your kid ready for the next year. Get it all now before the Christmas rush. And in January, you're all worried about getting your kid ready for school. So she'd word it in a way that would actually then start to make sense to people, make it easy for them and understandable as well. And it then propped up her income in a period that would normally have been down. But she only got to see that when she actually looked at the whole thing. And I mean, conceptually, she knew that it went down because she knew her income went down during that period, but she didn't know then what to do about topping it up. So it becomes a really good tool for making those kinds of decisions. And then from your business, because ultimately your business is there, even if you love it and you're passionate about it, you're making impact, it still has to fund your personal life. So you will have either a partner or children who are dependent on you, or you have other things that you want to do. You might want to be able to volunteer your time. You might want to donate to a charity that means something to you. So what is it in your personal life that you want to actually have happen? Do you have pets? Do you want to foster pets? Do you want to foster children? Like, what is it that you really want? And that your business is then going to have to fund. So lifestyle. So often I see people who have no idea what kind of lifestyle they want. They just randomly do the things that they think they should do at the time of life. They think they should do it. And then they sit back and go, this actually isn't what I want. This house is way too big. I actually don't want to be like in a separate area to my kids or my family. I'd like to have a small, like, being conscious about it. Whereas if you want to have a big house, then also realize, okay, well, am I going to clean it? Someone else going to. It's just those kind of thoughtful decisions that being intentional about it. I can see you laughing, Carol. You've probably experienced, yes. My father and his ex-wife now bought this huge house because they dreamed of a huge house. Well, guess what happened? Within a year, they were starting to resent the house because it took so much time and effort to maintain it. And then there was this expectation it had to be kept at a certain level because it was, considered a slightly more, prestigious house. And so when they wanted to sell it, they ended up spending thousands of dollars just trying to get it ready for sale because it was in that prestigious category. And they bought a much smaller, more simple house the next time. So and sometimes you got to go through this to figure it out as well. But if we can try and, foretell a little bit of what the future is going to hold before we make some of these decisions, if it's more aligned with our values and what we actually want to achieve. And again, why do you want that? Do you just want it to be a showpiece, which I think is what my dad was actually going for? It was kind of like a representation of, here is what I've managed to achieve in my life, and here is the house to prove it. But it still didn't make him happy. So, and then how much money do you actually need to fund the lifestyle? I'm seeing quite a lot. There's trends. I mean, obviously things can come and go. And there were sea changes and tree changes that were a big thing in the 90s. At the moment now, I'm seeing a lot of tiny homes where people are, buying just some land and putting a tiny home on there that's completely off grid. And they build like a plunge pooly type thing. And there's a particular lady I follow on Instagram I was like, yeah, that looks really lovely. I'm not sure how well it would work if you had kids that had to go to school and, all sorts of other things. But for her lifestyle, it works. And it's also very aligned with her values, which is another reason it's a pleasure to watch. So have a look at what you want, how you want it, and how much money you'll need to make it happen. Because it might be less or it might be more than you think. But unless you look at it, you don't know. And this is knowing your cash flow makes that part easier as well. So managing, how to then manage cash flow. So it helps with budgeting and forecasting. So cash flow itself is very much, and when we think of budgeting, we think of contracting. All a budget really is just being aware of where your money is. I was talking with a client a couple of days ago, and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to have to get rid of my coffees." I'm like, "No, no, no, no. If the coffees are important to you, then figure out something else that is not so important to you, and then you can keep your coffees." Because if keeping your coffees and eating out, it might be that you need to actually figure out your budget around that. And that was in their personal life. In the business, it might be, I want to be able to go on a retreat once a year, and that's going to cost me $3,000. Okay, great. Now that we know that, you can fit that into your budget. But unless you have that, it's really hard to know it. And then being able to forecast out as well what products and services that you need to sell, how much of them, what price point they need to be, what you're anticipating things to be based on historical, and also what you would like to achieve. And then you can look at the difference between how your forecast is going, what your budget is, and then also how much you're actually achieving too. So once you get into it, it actually becomes a lot easier to manage, especially when it's set up in a nice, simple way. None of this has to be complicated. We don't need fancy accounting packages. To be honest, I manage all this in Excel. You can use Google Sheets. Like it's quite possible to do that. One thing you do have to do with cash flow, it's really important to make sure that you're putting money aside for the things that you actually are going to have to outlay and you don't want to be surprised about. So profit is one thing. If you haven't read Michael Mikhailovich, I think his name is, his Profit First book, I would highly recommend it. I find he convolutes it a little bit, but the concept is sound. So make sure you put some money aside, because it's really good mentally to see some of your cash actually growing and sitting there. Tax is another really big one. The amount of times I've had clients come to me and say, "Oh, I just got this tax bill for $14,000," or someone the other day, a client was saying to me their husband got a tax bill for $70,000. I was going, "Oh my gosh, that shouldn't be a surprise." You should not get a tax bill that you are super surprised about. But on the flip side, I had another client who said that they got this tax refund of about $7,000 that they weren't expecting. I was like, well, and that was the previous tax year from when we were working together. And I was like, okay, so now you should be as close as possible to that, because it's better the money sits with you for that period of time than it sits with the tax office, because you can keep it in an account that's earning you money. So it's making sure that you can be as close as possible to forecasting. Oh, I see a chat coming up. Michaela, excellent. Thank you, Carolyn. Yes, that's the book. That's it. And then peaks and expenses as well. Things go up and down. I have a buffer account for that. Whenever, I know at certain times of year when I have like a mastermind that I'm paying for and I pay annually, there's going to be a real peak there. So I have to save up little by little, and I have the account there for those peaks. So it's being able to manage where your cash is going, coming in and out. And if you can see ahead, it makes life so much more relaxing when you don't get a bill for however many thousands or even, hundreds of dollars that surprises you. We're trying to reduce or minimize as much as possible surprise. And then paying yourself first, like I said, with profit and salary. They're two different things. So we're not talking about a salary. We're talking about a profit for your business, but then also a salary that you pay yourself as a business owner. Early days of a business, a lot of it will probably go back into the business. But try and pay yourself a salary, because ultimately you're doing this to make money. And that's a real thing. And that's an okay thing too, because otherwise, why else? And try and steady the salary if you can. Again, once you have a view of how things go over time, you can go, well, on average, I will make this amount. So I can afford to pay myself that amount every month. There might be a little excess, so I could pay myself a bonus maybe every 3 to 6 months. But at least you can steady your business income in your personal life, so it makes your personal finances a lot easier to manage, especially if you're blending them with someone else, like a partner. And that also makes automating a lot easier as well. If you're not a natural saver or investor, Automating that process is very advisable, because then you can just say, okay, well, I know I'm going to pay myself this amount every month. And then you can monitor it to see if, something really, there's a windfall that happens and you're like, oh, I want to put a bit extra in. You can still do that. And you can always adjust the automation as you go too. But to try and keep that steady, then at least you're putting a certain amount of money into the various accounts that you have, and investing. Investing is another one. If you're not sure what to do, that I won't cover that in this topic here, but if feel free to ask me, and I can direct you into different areas to learn a bit more about that. When it comes to your business cash flow, you can automate the calculating. So again, you have your tool that helps you look at all of the income and the expenses that are coming in. And then you can go, okay, well, I've got this much left, and I'm going to do percentages here. So I'm going to have a certain percentage that will go to tax, a certain percentage that will go to profit, and so forth. It just makes that part a little bit easier, but you can automate the calculating of it, and then you have to manually do the transfers for business because it will fluctuate. There's no real way around that unless your entire business is subscription based, which is quite rare. So again, what it allows you to do also is then to identify if your business model needs to change. Do you need to go more service based? Do you need to, up your ante on products? Do you need to do more group work, or perhaps more one-on-one? It allows you to look at how you've structured your business and make some decisions about that, rather than just, again, there's that, I hear this so often, but the throwing the spaghetti at the wall thing. Sometimes we have to do that a little bit to try things out. But once we've figured out which spaghetti is going to stick or not, then we can start to make some more measured decisions once we can see what's working and what's not. You can expand on existing products or services so that you can scale it. Perhaps if it's something you can teach others, you can then bring somebody in. You can outsource to VAs. I see that so much now. So everyone's outsource. I'm like, well, you've got to have the money to do the outsourcing. But anyway, but once you get to the point where you can see what's working, you can then outsource bits and pieces of it as well. Nurturing your clients so you can see what they really need and the types of products or services that they're asking from you. And then you can increase repeat business by going, okay, well, you really love this. I have to admit, I'm one of those people. I love it when I'm on a website, especially when it comes to clothing. Like, well, if you like this, you might like that, especially if it matches. I love matching things. I may not necessarily choose to buy it, but I love that they've offered it, at least, to say, okay, well, if you liked this top, here are the matching pants, or here's a scarf or something that looks good with it, something like that. So you can at least provide some of that to your clients to see if it works for them. You can identify new markets even. If you can start to see that, like I did with my business, I started to see nearly all of my clients who were coming to me were either existing small business owners or aspiring small business owners. I was like, oh, okay, all right. So I think I'm going to start to head in this direction now, because I can also delve deeper into certain things than I was previously. And they're things that I think are really important. So you can still align it with what your skill set and your knowledge base and everything is, but you can move with what's happening in your business because you can see what's happening. You can look at your niche as well, to see if that's working. And like I said, initially when I started my business, I was like, oh, everybody needs to know about money. And then whenever I'd talk to men, they'd ask me about crypto. And I was like, no, that's not what I talk about. I'm not talking about crypto. No, no, no. So I very quickly got into, and if it wasn't crypto, it was generally about investing. I was like, I'm more about money education than helping people invest. There's a lot of people already doing that. You can go see them. And I thought, well, okay, I think men are probably not my market. So it ended up being more. So you start to niche a bit as you go as well. And when you can see what's working and you have that information, it makes that part a little bit easier too. Trends I've spoken to as well. So you can see the times of year. You might see there's a real spike, of interest for your product just before winter. Or if you're a personal trainer, you might see people really kick into gear about a month or two before summer, before they realize, oh my gosh, you're going to have to wear a bathing suit soon. And you can, I mean, in some of those, we know that's what happens anyway, but you can then actually start to see that, because it might happen earlier or later than you think it will. And then you've got to prepare yourself for that. You're like, okay, well, I can see things spiking in, say, September. So I need to start preparing June, July to get my campaigns or whatever ready so that I can start to market that in enough time for people when they're ready to actually focus on the thing that we know they want. So that's where being aware of your cash flow, that's what it really allows you. It empowers you. It really does. Knowledge is power. And this is evidence of that. Oh, and the all important and throw the steak knives in. They're so funny to watch those ads. I don't know if they still exist, but anyway. So identify most profitable clients. So these are some metrics that you can manage as well. So I've just mentioned them here, so I won't go into the detail of them, but look at the individual clients as well as the type of clients that are most profitable. Look at the profit base of each of your products, or if you're doing a project, if it's project work that you do, but look at at what point does it become profitable, and then how much to reinvest in your business. You can look at what wage you're paying yourself or what salary. But then do you want to scale and grow? If you want to invest perhaps in another staff member or a VA, and how you can actually physically do that with the cash that you've got. And then when to make other capital investments. You might, depending on where you are in your business, you might want to get outside capital in. And if you're not aware of your cash flow, it's impossible to do that because you don't know how much you need. You don't know what you need it for. Like it's not to say that everyone's going to need that. But if you start to think a little bit like that, it just also then perhaps sets up an exit strategy for you as well. And then you have a look at your clients, who owe you money. So accounts receivable, excuse me, is a really big one. I remember years ago when I was consulting, and I'd started with a new client, and they had quite a convoluted process. It was a big company, and the first time I'd submitted my invoice, I'd missed the deadline for 1 month, and then the person who had to approve my invoice missed a deadline. So I ended up waiting like 4 months to get paid. So I was just like, oh my goodness, by the time, and I'd been doing other work in the meantime as well, and it all just like compounded. So when I finally got paid, it was quite a windfall, but still, I was like, all right. So that's when the cash flow reality really kicked in, because I was like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm prepared for this. If ever this happens again, I need to have money set aside. So the cash flow impact became really, really obvious. And so here are just some other metrics as well. I'll go through a little bit of the terminology concepts too. If any of this doesn't make sense, please ask me. Either now or at the end. But income goals, again, I've alluded to some of these, and I've mentioned some of these over the course of today. But when you're looking at your income goals, what is it that you actually want? Like I said, it's very arbitrary to just say, I want to earn that 250,000, or I want to get to 6 figures. Or, when I hear the 6 figures and 7 figures, I was like, okay, well, what does that really mean? What does that look like? What do you actually need to sell? Like, for instance, if you're selling low cost products and services, how many of those do you need to sell to get to the 250,000? Or if you're selling higher ticket, perhaps you then want to create some options for people when they're doing private work with you. You can have this, or you can have this, or you can have this. And I'd need to sell, say, 5 of this and maybe 10 of that and maybe 20 of that in order to get to that goal. So you can kind of work your way backwards. It helps to have clarity in terms of the lifestyle that you want. And if you know how much your expenses are, then you can start to see, okay, well, I have this much that I need to cover just to survive. Then to thrive, I need this much. But to really enjoy life, I want that much. And without those goals, it's really hard to hit them. Because if you don't have them, you're just going to coast along and not know where you're going or how far you're going, or if you need to do an extra push at the end of the financial year. It's really difficult to do things intentionally. Profit or loss, this often, I think I've got one which actually goes into the difference between profit and loss and cash flow. So I'll put that one aside for a moment. Accounts receivable, we spoke about. It's important. It depends on your business model as to whether or not that's even a thing for you. It's not as much of an issue for me anymore because my business model has changed as my consulting has changed into more the business I do now. But if it still is, then look at that, and that's something to try and keep on top of. Profit by client. Like, how much time have you invested in a client versus how much they've paid you? Have you had to outlay any physical expenses, or is it just your time? But it's still important to look at that profit by client to also test whether or not what you're charging is actually enough. I know I used to do that. I used to just kind of go, oh, somebody might just pay that. And then I was putting in so much extra time, especially in the analysis side of it, because I do quite a lot of like data analysis for my clients because they don't want to. And that's perfectly okay, because I actually quite like doing it. And then I thought, oh my gosh, on an hourly basis, I'm paying like $5 an hour. So when you actually start to look at it like that, it helps you understand where the profit centers actually sit in your business. And then sales per product or service as well. And this is just an important one, so you know which one's the most popular. And we're testing and measuring as business owners constantly anyway. So it's, yeah. And even in your own personal life, you get to see, well, what do you spend your money on? And one of the things I find really interesting, and I had this conversation with a client last week, they were in quite a fortunate position where they bought their house. It's a sort of a modest house, but they bought it before the market really took off. So they paid it off this year. Great. I was like, yes, that's really exciting. Celebrate that, which they haven't, so they need to celebrate it still. But what it did do is now the money that they were paying on their home loan is just going, just disappearing because there's no plan for it. So then looking at your cash flow in your personal life becomes really important because, and then they get scared. Like she's like, well, how do I make sure I don't like do this again, like completely blow all my money? Like, well, you just need to know where it's going. What are you using it for? And then came all these things of, oh, we want to retire early. We want to send our daughter to a private school. I was like, okay. So you may have more demand for your money than you have supply, but let's actually like map it out and figure out how much you need to put into the different money pie slices, as I call them, to be able to manage that and to actually then achieve the things you want to achieve. Because at the moment, because you don't have that clear, it's just disappearing. And it is really amazing how easily it is to spend money and how quickly the cash can go out. It can come in and it can go out just as quickly. And in their case, her income was steady, but his was on commission. So his fluctuated. I was like, all right, we need to figure out a way to be able to manage all of that and actually earmark that money for things, because otherwise it'll just go. So this is where actually looking at your cash coming in and going out, particularly the going out in some cases, and it depends on your phase of life as well, becomes really, really important. Oh, hang on, next slide. Why is it not moving? There we go. So I said I'd talk about cash flow versus profit and loss, because this is something that it can be a bit complicated to understand that there is a difference. Profit and loss, or profit is basically your income minus your expenses. And this is what you see in an income statement. It used to be called the profit and loss statement. They've changed it to income statement. I actually thought profit and loss made more sense personally, or a P&L was what it was called when I was at uni. So that's a very, linear way of looking at it. It's usually for a calendar month and then a financial year. And quite often it will then also, with some other adjustments, depending on your business, turn into your taxable income, which is then what you pay tax on. Cash flow, however, is your money in minus your money out in totality. Profit and loss has a few different categories that are included in there, so it's not as all encompassing. Plus, cash flow gives you a real-time look at what your cash is doing at any given point in time. You don't have to wait for the end of the calendar month. You don't have to wait for the end of the financial year or your quarter or when you've lodged your BAS. It is very much so. I see businesses that have profit sitting in their accounting system, but they have no money in the bank, and that's what I'm trying to help alleviate here, is to help you understand where that money is going. Your profit and loss will not tell you that. Even quite often your cash flow statement out of your accounting system will also not tell you that. You need to actually look at your bank statement essentially and look at that, the detail of it. But that's the difference between the two. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, nodding. Okay, good. We could still feel free to ask if you want. So that was quite a lot. So I'll just do a quick recap of what all that was. So we talked about what cash flow actually is. And even though it's simply, the simple concept is cash in, cash out, there's a lot in there. And then there's a lot to do with identifying what to decide to do with the money that comes in, and then how considered to be with the money that goes out as well. Because quite often we just put blinkers on. Oh, it's doing its thing. My accountant's just doing their thing. I just don't want to look at it. It is important to start to get into that detail, and you don't have to dive into the detail every single month. You have to do that work once, and then you can just monitor it, and you can look at the pie slices, or you can look at the categories of expenses once you've got that, and you can just kind of see, oh, okay, oh, this is all right. I'm probably spending a little bit more on than subscriptions or on, taking clients out than I was. Is that translating into business? Yes, no. Okay, good. Well, then I'll keep doing that. So you can start to see the cause and effect of your money when you start to look at your cash flow as well. And then we covered what does being aware of your cash flow actually allow you to do, the types of decisions and the empowerment that you get in your business and in your personal life once you start to actually see it. And it becomes more real. It's not just a concept that you just are avoiding or that sits in an accounting system, because it is quite a different thing. And what goes in your business activity statement or your quarterly statements and then into your tax return at the end of the tax year is quite different. And then we talked about what else supports the cash flow in your business. So they're the other metrics and things that you need to be aware of, and being able to set the right goals and being able to budget and forecast in a way that you can, rather than just looking backwards, you look forwards. So there's a little bit of back and forth to allow, because the decisions that you make happen in the now, but the impact of those decisions you won't see until the future. So you may as well have an idea of the future you want so that your decisions now are aligned to helping you get there. I'm very much about intentional finances and just intentional living in general. Is this going to get me closer to where I want to go? I can't remember what it was the other day. I was thinking about something. This is how it's just all gone out of my head already. I was like, okay, is spending on this actually going to help me get to where I want to go? Like, no. And forward project a bit. We'll actually enjoy this in the future. It's a little bit like when my daughter buys a toy. The initial flush of, oh, this is exciting, it's my favorite toy. And then a week later, it's like, oh, where's that toy? She's like, oh, I don't know. I was like, it's probably buried at the bottom of her toy box. So it's a little bit like that. And it'll still happen, but just to be aware of, maybe try to avoid the impulse decisions that won't actually bring you slightly more than short-term pleasure and enjoyment. Okay, and if you would like more help, we'll get to questions in a moment, but I thought I'll just present to you a couple of options if you're interested. So I do a one-off money management assessment. These are essentially a review/strategy session to help kind of get you cleaned up. I do have templates that I can provide that actually help you then move forward, and there's a clear set of actions. So that's a one-off session. And then click. And then I'm also launching a Money Essentials for Business Owners mini course. So it's live. So it's very much presenting the information. You can ask questions. There'll be a Facebook group where you can have Q&A. There's a one-on-one session with me in the beginning. And because it's launching up soon, if you get on the wait list, there's going to be some special bonuses as well. So there's no commitment right now. You can just go on the wait list. I don't know, hopefully you can see the link at the bottom. I've got my screen's got all these various things on there. But it's money-madesimple.com.au/money-essentials. I will have a shorter URL for that at some point. But so that will give you mindset. It will also be working on what you actually want, so some clarity, and then also the basics of just managing money from your personal and to your business, and giving you a strategy for how to do that and the templates to support it. So if you're interested, there's the wait list. Now, questions. If anyone's brave enough to ask me some questions, you don't have to turn your camera on if you don't want, and you can ask them in the chat if you don't feel comfortable unmuting as well. But I did go through a bit there, so let me know if anything didn't make sense or if you'd like something explained a bit more. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone a bit better. Oh, and these are some other ways to find me if you would like to follow me a bit more. All right, I'm just going to stop sharing. And what I might do is actually stop the recording just in case you don't feel comfortable with your questions being on the recording as well. So I'll just stop that.